Welcome to Beyond the B, an ongoing dialogue about the past, present, and future of the B Corp movement. Co-hosts Emmy Allison and Ryan Honeyman facilitate an open and honest conversation about the B Corp movement, advise companies on how to increase their impact, and provide a deep dive into the new B Corp standards that are shaping our community.
I'm Ryan Honeyman, a partner at Lift Economy, and my guest today is Professor Christopher Marquis. Chris is the Sidney Professor of Management at the University of Cambridge and author of The Profiteers: How Business Privatizes Profits and Socializes Costs. His research examines regenerative business models and corporate sustainability, and he has written 2 prior award-winning books, including Better Business: How the B Corp Movement's Remaking Capitalism, and Mao and Markets: The Communist Roots of Chinese Enterprise, the latter which was a Financial Times Best Book of 2022. Chris is passionate about how academic research can help people around the world address some of the biggest crises of our day, including climate change, inequality, and discrimination. Before Cambridge, Chris worked at Cornell for 6 years and Harvard for 11 years. He has a PhD in sociology from the University of Michigan and previously worked for 6 years in the financial services industry, most recently as a VP at JP Chase. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Really looking forward to our conversation.
You know, it's interesting. At University of Michigan, were you there with Suntae Kim and Todd Schiffling at all? Did you overlap?
I did not overlap, but it's a small world, and we had Suntae and I had the same advice. Actually, I had 2 dissertation advisors. One of them was Suntae's advisor. The other was Todd's advisor. So they came a little after me, and they're great guys, and I know them well. I know that they've been on your show too.
Yeah. Just for listeners, we did a show with Suntae and Todd around the paradox of B Corp and sort of how it's both getting harder and also letting in more companies. So, and Chris and I today we'll get into some of that. And I also I don't know if I knew that you worked at JP Chase. Tell me about that brief period of your life.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it was 6. I was there for 6 years. That was basically my first job was in financial services. I wasn't at JP Chase for 6 years. I was actually for 4 years for a company that actually ended up Bank One, which was a regional bank that ended up being acquired by Chase. And then Chase ended up being sort of merged into JP Morgan. So I worked in financial services for a number of years. My first jobs in my 20s.
Wow.
And it told me that I didn't want to work in a bank my whole life. And so I went back to school to get my PhD at Michigan.
Okay, so this is pre-PhD. Got it.
This is pre-PhD. Yeah.
Okay.
Pre-PhD.
Well, let's jump into some of these questions. And just for listeners, Chris and I are going to talk about the B Corp movement and some of his books, Better Business, Profiteers, and kind of get into some of the challenges and tensions of the movement. And so maybe, Chris, when Better Business first came out in 2020, the B Corp movement was around 3,500 certified companies, and we're now past, I think it's almost 11,000 in over 100 companies. And when you look at that growth, what is your read on it? Does the scale feel like progress? Does it complicate some of the original vision of the B Corp movement? Or what's your take on the sort of scale of how much it's grown since you wrote that book?
Yeah, clearly grown a lot. And even, I did write the book in 2020, but I wrote the first case study at Harvard Business School case study in 2010 and started researching B Lab in 2009 when there were like 200 B Corps. So it has grown a lot. And I do, that's one way to think about it. Okay, so it went from 200 B Corps to now 11,000 sort of all around the world. Originally it was just a US movement. But how I think about sort of assessing the impact is much more than just about B Corps themselves. And that's why, the book I titled The B Corp Movement, because obviously the B Corps are, a focal node, and entrepreneurs and business for good is core to that movement. But also you have things like the benefit corporation form. I just recently, another guest that I know was on your podcast, Eric Ries, just finished his book Uncorruptible recently. And he actually really focuses a lot on the importance of basically benefit corporation governance as a way to sort of structurally unwind all the problems with shareholder primacy. And that's an example of something where we would not have this law, which is now in 40 plus US states, maybe even over 45, lots of countries around the world, from Italy and France and Colombia and a number of other places in Latin America to Rwanda even. I actually just learned that in Rwanda, when you establish a business, actually the benefit corporation is the default form.
Really?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I just heard this from Bart Houlihan, actually. So I assume that it's actually like this would be something he would know. So I haven't investigated it myself. I need to look into that. And this is something, that in the UK, the Better Business Act is also trying to get on the agenda to have the default company type be a benefit corporation. So that is huge. I also think I'm about to go, and we'll be seeing Sunte and Todd to the main conference for business school academics. I think there's about, over 10,000 people are going to be descending on Philadelphia in basically a week. And there's a big set of B academics. And this is something where it's a community. I mean, it's not going to be the thousands of people at this gathering. I think there'll be probably a couple hundred people that are studying B Corps, that are talking about B Corps with their students. Some places like, NC State, Florida, have these B Corp clinics where students are working directly with businesses on the B impact assessment. And this is something also that makes the movement so much bigger, because injecting it into education really shows people that are learning to think about like what responsibility is in our economic system, a really good foundation. So those are two examples of where I think thinking about the B Corp movement, it's about much, much more than just the number of B Corps.
You mentioned the studying of the B Corp movement. I know it's an elusive goal, but could you explain to me, if I were to say, hey, B academics, this is what we need, is like, how much money do you save or make as a B Corp? Like, if you're a B Corp, you make 30% more revenue year over year. Like, is it the research is really hard to create to like actually measure something like that? Or are people focused on different things? Or like, what's your thoughts on like, how do we get those like sort of the ROI numbers on B Corp a little more?
It is a challenge for many reasons. So one is data availability. So in the B impact assessment, there's not like firms are not reporting their revenue year on year. So that sort of systematic set of data doesn't really exist. Also, in order to really identify that causal process of B Corp to financial process, for financial progress in some way, be it profitability, ROI, whatever measure you want to use, it's actually really complicated. You need measures typically over multiple years. You need a really good comparison group. So, sort of like people might be familiar with, these medical trials where, you need to have people like this double blind, where people that are not getting the treatment and people getting the treatment. So you need to actually show that it has a causal effect. You need to find a good treatment group. And that is a really hard thing to find as well. People have some creative ways of doing that, like companies that filled out the B impact assessment and maybe gotten very close to 80 in the old version. So that, these are companies you have some data on. They are sort of almost B Corps, but that perfect control group is just not there. So it is really hard to actually identify in a very, very systematic, bulletproof way. That said, there's a lot of qualitative and other evidence from many companies, which you probably are even more deeper exposed to companies you work with in this, where it's like, wow, my employee retention has shot way up, or I'm attracting much better candidates, or some other mechanism. So I think that a lot of times, not looking at the financial outcome, but looking at like, okay, these more proximate mechanisms around retention or attraction of talent is one example that people can look at.
I definitely agree with the talent component, the credibility. That's why there's more studies on publicly traded companies, right? Because they're all reporting their financials.
100%. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So if we could have B Corps, we almost need like B Corps to have voluntary, there's some sort of, you opt in to this voluntary longitudinal study where you're actually reporting your financials to a group of academics over a 5-year period. And then you have a control group identified who's also reporting their, because then you'd also have to have a control group who's reporting their financials.
Yeah. So it is not inconsequential, the challenges. Although hopefully maybe some of the people that are listening to this, some of the B Corps are listening to this, please be in touch. I would love to actually, enroll you in some of those studies.
Hey, I think anything's possible. Okay, let's work this through. How many companies do you need to actually create, what do you call it, an effect?
On the low end, I think potentially 50 to 100 might be doable. And then you'd need probably a control group of that.
I was thinking 10, but 50 to 100, that's good.
So I think that to really dive into some of the more qualitative type of mechanisms, I think 10 would be good. But to do some reasonable statistical analyses, you will need more than that.
So we need 50 to 100 B Corps and then 50 to 100 non-B Corps willing to bare their soul of all their financial vicissitudes in private to a group of academics. But I think that would be one of those amazing, I think there's a way to do it. So maybe me and you should chat more about this offline to sort of recruit the cohort.
Yeah. And I must say there is some ways to get around that. And I think one of the things I've really appreciated, and Todd was also involved in this. So 2 students of Todd and myself, or a student each, we were the first group of fellows that B Lab had, global fellows. And they gave us really deep access to the B Impact assessment data. I think Todd and his student, Vias, they are working on a set of studies around, I think, venture capital funding, and they've connected the B Impact data with PitchBook to get sort of good data on how much companies getting funded, the different rounds, et cetera. My student, Kunyan, and I should say Kunyan is really the person that's leading on this, not me, connected it to a set of data that has financial data of private firms. And so we have a data set of about 1,000 B Corps and a reasonable control group that has some financial data in it. And that's one that we're sort of working through. Actually, we're just emailing about this today, believe it or not, trying to think about the ways to examine this. So it is possible to do it a bit. And I hope we should definitely talk more because I'm sure you have some good insights about some of the things we could be looking for in that data.
Well, there's also just on the B Impact assessment, when companies have to fill out their revenue. So at least you could get every 3 years. If a company's been a B Corp for a couple cycles, you could have every 3 year, but it's not quite enough. I don't know. It'd be proximate, but I think it'd be useful.
And it might be, I don't know if you know this better than me. My sense is that there's not a consistent numerical value. It's in buckets, you're over 25 million so. And some of those buckets are pretty broad.
Okay. Well, I'm glad we get to nerd out a little on the academic side.
Hopefully people haven't hung up, so to speak.
Well, this framing shift, because you wrote Better Business. So, it's about the B Corp movement. And then is it 2023 was Profiteers?
It was 2024.
2024. Okay. So Profiteers comes out, and that kind of shift, I think, maybe surprised some people because it was hey, this group's positive force for change, but there's also these companies that are really starting to, it's also calling out what is wrong with the system. And so could you explain that arc? And maybe for folks who don't know what Profiteers is, you could speak to that.
Sure. Yeah. So I think people that may be familiar with Better Business, which is really about the B Corp model, and not just for companies, but also the legal changes and its engagement with the investment community. The Profiteers I think of as in some ways both a prequel and a sequel to Better Business. So the prequel part is that I really dig into the criticism of the current economic structure. And the subtitle of Profiteers is how firms privatize profit and socialize costs. And it's these companies really through very creative, and it's a negative type of creative ways of pushing the social cost on to the broader environment of society. Like pollution is an example, where the carbon emissions, it has greenhouse gas effects, it has a variety of effects of people's respiratory and health around the places where that's coming into the fore. So I try to really dig into why we need to understand companies in a real holistic way. The sort of example of a company that I give, and it's a critique, I should say, too, of stakeholder capitalism in some ways. I know that stakeholder ideas are involved in the B impact assessment. The way I think about it is in a critique, is that so many companies deploy it in, I think, very sneakily greenwashing ways. So the example I give in the book, and I use often because people can get it, is Pepsi. Pepsi is a company that they get all kinds of accolades for being, great at stakeholder capitalism. They win the Just Capital award and list. Their former CEO talked about purpose. So they're sort of pointing to all these things that they do, shiny type, okay, we're doing these great things in regenerative agriculture, maybe for employees. And I'm sure those things are good. I'm not saying they should stop that. But we should be really thinking about what the core of Pepsi's business is, which is basically selling, in the US at least, chemically sweetened water or cellular liquid in plastic containers, creating all kinds of public health impacts. And they lobby against any sort of restrictions or ways they're constraining, the ingredients they could use. If their Frito-Lay division actually has been shown to engineer things like chips and other things to be addictive, as far as the crunch and the salt and obviously plastic waste. They are behind Coke in having the most plastic waste of any company. So is this a company that should be seen as being a good stakeholder company? No, I don't think so. I think we need to be thinking like the B Corp ideas and thinking about how to actually fully assess companies. So the prequel part is this critique of how we understand responsibility. And then the sequel part is really trying to dig into like what it means to be a much more, regenerative, positive force in the world. And probably no company is regenerative yet. Hopefully, maybe some will get there. But I think sustainability as a term and practice is a lot of times about mitigating damage and sustaining the status quo. And I think we need to be thinking much more deeply about, how we can positively advance the world. And so the back part of the book is really taking, more recent B Corps and showing how they're sort of involved in that kind of activity.
And do you think that did Anand Giridharadas' book, The Winners Take All, did that influence your book at all?
Yeah, very, very much. Very much. Yeah. I mean, the publisher was really, the publishers are are both great and horrible at times. I mean, they have I do have lots of good ideas. I mean, I must admit that when I was trying to sell Better Business to a publisher, one of the publishers actually gave me the idea. They said, you should be focusing much more on the criticism of why this is a problem, because bad things sell. So that was in 2018, I guess, when I was trying to find a publisher for Better Business. And then the most recent publisher I had for The Profiteers really used Winners Take All as an example of like how to think about marketing the book. I must say, and I'm a fan of Winners Take All, but I feel that it's too heavy on critique and not heavy enough on trying to put solutions forward. And I learned through writing that book that I'm more of a solutions-oriented person. I like to try to think about ways that business and economic systems can be reformed, and then actually try to communicate those positive things to business and engage business directly. I think it's another kind of person that just wants to stand on the sidelines and critique. So I've learned that about myself. And I think most of my future work will be much more in the vein of Better Business, but keeping in mind that we need to be thinking about what is the problem and critique that we're trying to address.
What have you seen with your students, maybe since 2018? Like for me, the 2019, what is it? The roundtable, the CEO roundtable?
Business roundtable, yeah.
Business roundtable. Yeah. Where, B Lab had tried to influence these guys, writing a New York Times ad about like, let's get back to work, Jay and Bart and Andrew using their brilliance in marketing. And then you had the stakeholder roundtable respond and be like, yeah, we should do this. And it was like, wow. And then, of course, I think you mentioned in your book, that's the Business Roundtable, like the first ones to yank all the like health benefits and fire people and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But what are you seeing in your students' arc? Like, are people fed up? Are they leaning into the, like, maybe this is all greenwash, like everything's greenwashing, nothing's real? Or are they getting the anti-woke, like, what are you sensing from students in this sort of time period of these books up to now?
Yeah, good question. Definitely until a year or two ago, I think there was huge wins at the back. I mean, I think this is something students saw as essential for their career. They were interested, passionate about actually having a career that means something. These last few years have been much more of a challenge to be talking about these ideas with students. Certainly, there's some students that are really still passionate and engaged, but I think a lot of them, yeah, they think it's greenwash. They think it's not relevant. So similar to we've seen around the world, corporate pullback, I think there's also been pullback among students as well.
Are academic institutions pulling back on the amount of courses and sustainability they're teaching and things like that? Or is it?
Well, I'm very sorry to say that yes, big time. Is something that's been very frustrating to me at Cambridge, just to be very honest, is that there's been definitely sort of a gutting of the sustainability curriculum that I and many other people were active in building. And in part, I mean, there's a variety of reasons why. I think that the advent of AI, schools are also looking for like, how can we get more AI? And then you have the sustainability stuff that is under attack. Companies are not as involved in it. Students are more and more leery about it. So there's definitely been a pullback, without a doubt. And it really frustrates me because these issues are not going away. I mean, climate change. I mean, I think clearly AI is really important, but many of the changes that you think of broadly with sustainability, climate change, inequality, migration, discrimination. I mean, these are the issues that are getting worse and worse and are going to be really very salient for my students' careers and ways to think about them in productive ways to actually make a difference. I think it's really, really important. And it's very frustrating to me that that's changed, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even I know in the US, there's certain academics that I'm aware of where they literally can't say certain words anymore, like DEI or sustainability or whatever.
Can you believe that? Isn't that crazy? The UK, I mean, yeah, they're still feel very free in communicating about these issues, but I know in certain places in the US that it is pretty constrained.
Yeah. Well, I guess my overall sense is that this is a pendulum swing. I mean, I remember when I was in college and it was George Bush Jr. and it was like the Iraq War, and it felt like, and then the Republicans had the House and the Senate, and like my professor at the time was like, it feels like the pendulum is broken off and just keeps swinging to the right. I was like, there's no way back from this. Like, we're just going down the wrong path. And then, of course, in some ways, George Bush Jr. and all that laid the sort of path for Obama. Like, I don't know if Obama would have been possible, like if he hadn't. So it's hard to know what the pendulum swing back will look like. But I do feel like those of us that keep the focus and keep the sort of positivity going, there will eventually be a swing back of the pendulum, and people who abandoned the sustainability things will be scrambling, I feel like, to make up.
Exactly. I think that's exactly right. And I do think, I mean, sadly, these issues, I mean, we see this now, record heat everywhere, wildfires and smoke. I'm in New York right now. We just had sort of all this smoke that's coming from wildfires in Canada. Obviously, California last year had some really serious fires. I mean, the heat is in the UK. Fortunately, I was not there, but I'm getting emails every day from Cambridge saying, don't come into the office. It's too hot. France, people are dying. I mean, it's, this is not going to get any, I know with the El Nino and et cetera, but it is not going to get any better. And so there's this saying in the degrowth literature, either by destruction or design. So I really push on the design part of things and trying to, let's think about ways to hopefully avoid the worst of it. But if we keep putting it off, it's going to come.
B Lab released their new standards last year. I can't believe it's already been a year since they've been released.
That is incredible.
It's taken a year to wrap our heads around it, I think.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. The first 9 companies have certified. And yeah, what's your sense? What's your take on the new standards? Do you feel like, what did they get right? What could be maybe improved in future iterations? Are you teaching it in your courses at all?
Yeah, I'm not teaching it specifically, but I do I'm following it in some ways. I'm sure I'm not as deep as you or maybe many of our listeners, but I am a huge fan of the standards. I think there is a lot of uncertainty around them and people, and there's, I'm out talking to groups, to B Corps a lot, and there's a lot of worry, like, oh, will I be able to certify? It seems too hard. But some of the things I think that are really positive, first of all, this sort of Pepsi example I gave, which is an extreme one, where companies can be really, really good at one thing and then maybe having bad things. I think that the 80 threshold served a really good purpose for the first phase of the movement. And I think there was even a selling point. I remember some of the B Lab founders saying, okay, we did this because people that are really focused on employees and social justice, can score a lot there. Maybe they need to have some work to do. We want them to know that work to do in the environment and improve, or vice versa, good environment. So I think that having the 80 for the group, that early group, made a lot of sense because people learned and people saw areas to improve. I think as you get bigger, there's more risk to that type of model because you might have companies that greenwashing might be a strong way to put it, but maybe people have a lot more questions about whether this actually would or should qualify. So I think that actually having like a floor, like companies have to do all of this across these 7 different areas, I'm a big fan of that. I think that makes a lot of sense. I also think, there's a lot of, from what I understand, work to do interoperability with like the GRI or CSRD. And I think that is really important because companies are going to be required more and more to provide data on ESG, what I'll call it. And I think the more that the B impact assessment can help companies with that, I think it actually provides a lot of good business value. I think also another thing I like is that it's sort of phased in some ways where companies have to do certain things like in year 0. And then there's like a push to get better and to deepen the commitment. So those are some things I like. The things that I think that B Lab will focus on this. I think they do not have like impact business model focus anymore, which to me, that was always a special sauce type of thing, might be a strong way to put it. But the fact that companies, their business model is oriented to social and environmental good is something that's so important to recognize and foster and encourage companies to do. And from what I understand, that has something to do with, like assessing it with the connection with the CSRD or the European regulations. They haven't worked that out. I think that maybe will be worked out at some point. I think also, I like the score too. I mean, I do. I think it's important to have a threshold and a floor, but also so many B Corps I know really are so proud of their score. And it creates a lot of very positive, virtuous cycle type effects where companies learn things they can get better on. It improves their score. So I think that actually the score, having a score element to it, has value too. So those are some of the things that I think I really like a lot. Overall, I'm really like it, hugely supportive, but some of the areas where I hope that B Lab will be working on in the future.
Well, I know for sure they're working on the impact business models. They want to bring that back. I keep encouraging them. I think they do want to bring back differentiation. It's just how do you do it and stay compliant with the EU regulations, right? I actually wanted to ask you about this. It's interesting in the B Corp world because Jay and the team were so brilliant at the marketing component in the earlier years where it was like business as a force for good. These are the highest standards for social and environmental performance, like not best in the world, best for the world. And now a lot of the language you can't really say in Europe. I'm not 100% sure. I think this is primarily where it's coming from. It's like you can't just make claim like you can't say the best for the world. Like, what does that mean? The regulators can be like, show me exactly what you're doing. So they have to change their language, right? And so it's moving from, I think, what Jay had always envisioned, which is the tip of the spear, the people leading others up the mountain, the B Corp community, to now it's like, this is the floor for, we want every company to be a B Corp. And I think there's some B Corps who are feeling like, wait, I thought we were the highest tip of the spear going up the mountain, and now we're like the floor of like impact. Am I making sense here?
Yeah, totally making sense.
How do they reconcile that?
Exactly. Because, and something I so appreciate in spite so many of the entrepreneurs and businesses, leaders I've talked to, leadership is a huge part of this. And knowing that you're forging a path that others will follow. I mean, and knowing that's inspiring, and it's inspiring to the individuals, inspiring to their businesses, the people that work there. And yeah, just crossing this threshold doesn't have that same inspirational quality.
Yeah. And I think the challenge for B Lab, which I think, again, I have confidence that bringing back impact business models and bringing back some of that differentiation will then allow companies who are certified to say like, okay, we're certified and we have this impact business model that sort of gets this credit. And then we've also done XYZ above and beyond what we're required to do. Because then you can start to say like, we're not just all the floor, which the floor is pretty damn high. So let's say like, let's not actually critique the floor too much. But I think it's a different positioning than it was before, which was like, we're the best of the best.
Yep, exactly. It's a positioning. Yeah, I agree.
Maybe we could talk briefly about, speaking of how do you promote the best and how do you look at sort of these regenerative businesses. And, we spoke a little bit about Tony's Chocolonely and some of the companies you're inspired by in the B Corp movement. Can you tell folks a little bit about what have you loved about Tony's and maybe some of the other companies who are on that leading edge and maybe the regenerative side of the spectrum, and what do you get excited about when you look at the companies?
There's a couple things that really excite me, and as a little more context, I'm going to be this fall on sabbatical from Cambridge. I'm going to be in the Netherlands and in Amsterdam, and part of the reason why is that I've really become interested in digging into a number of Dutch companies that are doing some things that I'm personally very excited about exploring more and more. So one thing you mentioned, Tony's, that I'm interested in is, they have this open chain idea where they are taking their supply chain practices, which have sought to really eliminate child labor, slavery in the chocolate supply chain, which is if people don't realize how bad this is, they need to look at it's a really serious problem. And so many of the companies that I find very inspiring is ones that are not just trying to sell their product to be best in the world, but actually trying to create broader frameworks and systems to make the world better. And I think the open chain is a great example of this. And there's a lot of other companies from, Ben and Cherries and Albert Heijn, the largest Dutch supermarket, to, I think it's called Feastables, which is like Mr. Beast's brand is part of this, which I think is really kind of interesting. But a lot of companies have sort of signed on to this. And if you think about, if you actually want to change an industry, setting these standards is the way to do it. I mean, we need government action, but actually this collective action in the supply chain is really important. One of the things that I'd interviewed the CEO of Tony's, Doug Lamont, a while ago, and he said that stuck with me really, really well is that he really believes that the model is sort of collaborate in the supply chain, compete on the shelf. So all these things that people don't see, I mean, obviously there's quality, it has quality implications. I'm not saying it's nothing, but really let's have some pre-competitive action to raise the floor around things like human rights, labor standards, environmental sustainability. And this is something that all companies do. So this is one thing that I find really important and inspiring. Another thing, or just to sort of one more example of a Dutch organization, there's a water bottle company called Dopper, and they are a company. So their avowed mission is to end packaged water. So it's not like Yeti or Stanley or whomever to sort of expand their technology around bottles into other types of products. But this has led them to, if you think about, in some ways, I mean, not exactly put yourself out of business, but they now have a tap business. So they have a business where they're sort of selling taps to bring water to people. They worked with Google and Google Maps and have mapped 130,000 locations in Europe where you can get access to public water. They're working in other countries around water infrastructure. So, this is an organization where they have set this really, their mission statement is such that it reorients the kind of activities that they do in unique ways. And I mean, I think even, Patagonia is a great example too of this, we're in business to save our home planet. Well, when that's your mission statement, actually the types of things you're doing around secondhand, recycled, end of use consumer issues is very different than what other companies could do. So this idea of sort of shifting the mission for a social good and how that affects the companies. Triodos Bank also in the Netherlands is an example of this. Their mission is, I'm not going to not remember it exactly, finance change and change finance. So finance change, they're lending to all kinds of environment and social justice type of work and working with those organizations on whatever, savings accounts, or I'm not exactly sure what the products they're offering are. But also changing finance is part of their mission too. So they're involved in a variety of policy and other networks. So those are sort of the two, this one, pre-competitive behavior and social mission statements of business that I'm really interested in digging into more.
I mentioned before we jumped on that I had an interesting Tony's Chocolonely story. So I'll share this with you. So I interviewed Doug Lamont, who actually, thanks to you, I think I got in touch with the correct PR people. So thanks. And I did the interview, and I'm a big fan of Tony's. And I posted on LinkedIn something along the lines of, like, I'm paraphrasing, but the first sentence was, I think Tony's Chocolonely is really impressive, and it should be in the same credibility conversation as Patagonia. Because for me, I had listed the three things, like it's their mission lock structure. So they have the guardians, which we talked about in the interview with Doug. They also have the open chain, which you mentioned. And they're also helping to promote the Better Business Act in the UK to really get this sort of laws passed. And what was fascinating to me is once I posted this article, I said a few other things about and Doug mentions that B Corp should be broad movement. We shouldn't be a small, where everyone is sort of hyper amazing, but it's such a tiny community, it doesn't matter. I think that was the gist of what I had posted. And what ended up happening is some people started jumping in. They're like, well, I think what you're saying is wrong about Tony's. And I was like, I didn't know anybody had a negative opinion about Tony's.
Yeah.
And what came to pass in the comments was Tony's has done some things great, and the cocoa, what I learned and what I was naive about is that the cocoa supply chain is just incredibly dirty and incredibly hard to do good things at scale. And so people were saying, yes, Tony's has open chain, but at the end of the day, they're not paying enough, and it's still poverty in the supply chain. And then you had other people jumping in saying, well, what are we trying to say? Every company has to be perfect, and we can't have only perfection. We have to have companies who are trying to do better and change systems. And it turned into this, it was a little bit like a limbic hijacking. So then LinkedIn started I think probably be oh, people are arguing, so I'm going to up relegate this. So I ended up getting 100,000 impressions on this LinkedIn post.
My God.
And 450 reactions. So it was I looked at the analytics, and 60% of all of my LinkedIn interactions over 12 months were on this one post. But it just showed me, I think the broader point of all this was we still tend to have the two camps, the side of we need to all be the highest, most regenerative, everyone is paying the tip top and everything is 100% clean. And then you have folks being that's not realistic. We need to get the big players involved and change systems. And then you have those two people who actually still want the same thing. We all want the better society and better,
right? But
they're sniping at each other. And I don't know, how do you try to reconcile those types of arguments?
That is a really hard thing. And I just actually want to say two quick things that just in case people are listening and they might have good examples. So another few reasons. The mission lock is another area that I'm interested in, and ownership, another sort of set of things I'll be studying in the Netherlands. So I'm glad you mentioned that. That's another sort of set of things. So if people hear this and have any ideas, please be in touch. But to this example of the sort of sniping, and it's a really challenging question because, of course, things like child labor. I mean, like, there's things I guess that you could say are worse, but like that is really bad. Or the poverty wages is obviously bad too. So I don't know the details of exactly Tony's situation, but I've also talked to some of the NGOs that have been involved in monitoring and working with them, and they speak pretty highly of what they're trying to do. And it's very easy to criticize, like, no company is perfect. Patagonia, for instance, they still use a lot of fossil fuels in their outerwear, and people, I all the time, because I do use Patagonia a lot as an example of a company that I think is admirable in their mission, their obviously ownership and mission lock. But there are some things that they're doing that I think they will acknowledge that they can do better on and hope to do better on. So I don't have any sort of magic way to resolve it, but I do think that there's always going to be criticism.
Yeah. I think what I hope, and I'm going to try to write an article about this it's sort of the Deborah Fries and Margaret Wheatley have the two loops model. Have you seen that before?
Sure. Yeah, I know that. Yeah.
So for listeners, this is a podcast, so you can't see, but like one loop is sort of starting at the top and going down. And it's sort of like the hospicing out the old economy. So that's like your Nespresso and your Walmarts, and getting those players on board to stop doing bad things and do more good things, but it's not revolutionary. And then you have like kind of a line starting at the bottom and going up. That's more, it's the regenerative, cooperative owned, 100% living wage, supply chain, where, the challenge is that we actually need both of those loops to change the system.
Right.
But it's very hard when you're, say, in the revolutionary new cutting edge stuff, to be like, these sellouts, they're just putting lipstick on the pig. They're part of the problem, And then if you're in the large corporation like Walmart and you're doing things, you're like, these little people can't, they're going to change one light bulb, and like, we can change all the electricity in half the United States, So it's like there's always going to be that. And I think if we could get to a point where there's like an understanding that both are necessary, that's where I have some hope. But I don't know. We'll see. The more you get, you probably get the better sense of whether your students buy that argument. I don't know. Do they buy that you need both? Or
I think they definitely see that, and I think too that my big pitch as to why actually the sort of the revolutionary loop is important. I mean, not just because it's some tipping point, but also, if you think about ways that change gets made in the world, you have like things like open chain or mission lock ownership changes becoming much more socialized, and then governments pick them up, and then it moves from sort of this voluntary to mandatory type of thing. And so I think that I can't say enough about the importance of the smaller innovative companies and what they're doing to try to create new ways of thinking about responsibility and sustainability.
Yeah. Well, you'd mentioned earlier in the episode the Incorruptible book by Eric Ries. Have you been tracking that, and what's exciting for you out of his book?
A couple things. So actually, just this thing he has a bit in there as well about, I think it's standards. He has a chapter on standards.
Mission transmission talks about standards.
Yeah, and I think that these things start out like, I think the B Lab, or some of the work B Lab has been doing, that's drifted in and influenced things like the CSRD, obviously Benefit Corporation. Now the fact that there's Rwanda, needs to verify that, but also definitely the UK Better Business Act is pushing that to be the mandatory. So I think that's one of the things that I really appreciated. I think too, I am someone who, he mentions this in the book, that it's all this focus on governance is going to be sort of boring, but I just loved it, to be honest. And he has great examples. Costco is one of them that I did not know nearly enough about, but how they've been able to protect that mission and continue focusing on delivering these amazing products and services. And that's a giant company. I mean, this is not, Tony's Chocolonely is not pretty big, but it's not a small company. So, he's someone who I think has worked very deeply with these organizations. I don't know him, so I don't, I only have the experience from his book. But I did interview at one point. One other thing that I really appreciate is trying to create infrastructure like the long-term stock exchange. So that's something I read a little bit about in Profiteers, and I'd interviewed one of the board members there about that. So that's some of the things just off the top of my head. I should probably go back and take a look about it a bit more. But I think it's a great book in that it both diagnoses the problem, and then actually puts together a very systematic way that I think business people can really get and understand how to actually protect the mission of the company, and through governance, through who you get on your board, all kinds of stuff. So it's like a gold mine of, he has all these italicized like mission transmission. I mean, I need to go through and just pull out all the italicized words. I think probably has some slides online that I could probably find. You might know this, but there's so much in there that I need to find.
Part of what he told me for a little inside baseball on the writing is that he said there's this tool he used called Help an Author Out, I think, where you pay $30 a month and then it gives you this platform where you can invite test readers. And so he said he would invite hundreds and hundreds of test readers. So I think he did he would invite one person per day, so that it wasn't everyone ending up but then you sort of get this. I mean, he's the lean startup guy, so he's doing lean startup through a book, but it's like you sort of end up with this well designed book because you've had 600 sort of pre-readers.
Yeah, great. I need to actually look into that because that's something that might be useful as well. And I think too, he has this sort of galaxy and gravity type of metaphor that he carries, which at first I was not sure. I seemed a little hokey to be honest, but actually by the end, I really thought it really worked exceptionally well. And it actually provided in some ways a story to connect everything together. So I'm a huge fan of the book.
Well, I'm sure he'd come on your podcast. You want me to connect you guys?
Yeah, great. I was going to ask that after we chatted, actually. So, yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, maybe, looking forward a bit, if you were advising B Lab right now on one or two things they need to do to make this sort of movement more durable or successful over the next decade. I mean, this is a big question, but what would you tell them? Does anything come to mind on that?
Good question. The two things that I think are huge lifts that they're doing, you're sort of in some ways the process of I think the standards, I think as we talked about, makes a lot of sense. I think also, I travel around the world a lot. I mean, I've visited B Corp communities in Korea, Taiwan, China.
Weren't you in Indonesia or something?
I was at the B Corp Asia Summit, which is in Kuala Lumpur. And then we also did a side trip to Jakarta, which was really fascinating. And I've been to Brazil and obviously lots of places in Europe and in America. I've been to probably 10 plus B local organizations. So I think that the movement has thrived because of its sort of grassroots character, and people and entrepreneurs and regions take it up and adapt it to their own context. But I think now is the time to have maybe a little bit more global coordination. I think that B Lab is now in the process. I think they've formed a global board, and I think they're involved in trying to rationalize that network, which had gotten sort of too big and unwieldy. And I think that's something that, as we think about emerging regions like Southeast Asia, there was 500 people that attended this conference, huge amounts of excitement and interest, but still just a very minuscule presence of B Corps. Africa, obviously, pretty untapped. India, virtually no B Corps in India. So I think that trying to rationalize the global organization in a way that these areas that are emerging can grow even stronger.
Yeah. What was your takeaway from the Southeast Asia Summit or the B Corp Summit there? Any highlights or things?
There was a ton of highlights. The thing, this is going to sound like maybe a little thing, but it's something, it's what popped into my mind when you asked just how different the idea of what is responsible and sustainable is, and how we in the West, we have our own idiosyncratic views, which we think, I think we're all try to be culturally aware, but the two examples, the depth of that. So one, which I guess might not be surprising. So something, a type of B Corp that has somewhat bothered me are ones that are sort of these packaged water companies like Evian, or, I mean, Evian seems besides being, I think they're owned by Danone, who itself is a B Corp. I mean, like the fact that that company can be a B Corp I'm not a huge fan of that, to be honest. However, actually, I mean, so I don't think maybe in the West where we have clean sort of water from taps, we should be consuming Evian necessarily. But actually in Indonesia, bottled water is sort of a social good because that infrastructure does not exist and people need clean water. And so this is something where I had a little bit of a new perspective on actually bottled water. So that's a little one. The bigger one, there was actually a discussion with a bunch of pretty senior leaders in Southeast Asia with the B Corp team about why alcohol is okay, but tobacco is not. Their point was that actually in Asia and the Middle East, they have these hookah things where I don't know much about it, but it's like a social environment. And I guess there are a couple of these companies that have tried to become B Corps and that are very socially focused. However, there's this ban on tobacco. So their point was that there's a ton of alcohol brands. There's lots of evidence of many social harms that come from alcohol. And it's actually doesn't culturally fit their environment and actually very sort of inconsistent. So that was one where I was like, well, that is actually a really good point that in addition to the plastic thing it's good to get out of Cambridge, UK or the US to actually be talking to people because the world and people's situations are very different, and why I actually find myself trying to be pretty generous and thinking about, if people are really working hard on something, I will give a lot of benefit of the doubt because maybe I don't fully understand like the context and situation.
Yeah. Wow, that's really great insight. And do you think the Southeast Asia community, was everyone there like folks from Japan, like the B Market Builder and China?
Yeah. So this discussion did not have, it was more sort of very senior sort of entrepreneurs and business leaders that mostly I think were in Malaysia and Indonesia. However, yeah, so the larger event had, the B Market Builder, Naomi, and from Japan, the folks from Taiwan, from mainland China, from Korea. So yeah, it was obviously Southeast Asia and Singapore. So it was a pretty wide set of folks. A number of folks from B Lab came as well.
Like B Lab Global?
B Lab Global, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. One piece of advice I wanted to ask from you is, I'm going to be working on the third edition of the B Corp Handbook that's going to come out next year. And I guess if you were to offer any advice of like, hey, of all the things happening in the B Corp world, make sure, it's important that you really address this or this. Like, are there any topics that come to mind that you'd want to see addressed in a third edition that makes the book as relevant as possible to where we are?
I mean, I think these issues that we were talking about, I'm sure you're going to be dealing with the new standards in a really fundamental way. And I think it really makes the book even more than a third edition, probably. I mean, like a whole, like sort of, it's not the seventh version of standards, actually the version 2. I think that things are so different that, I think it's good to have the branding of the B Corp Handbook, version 3, but I can imagine it around the new standards actually having an entirely new conceptual architecture and really being a new book. So I'm sure you'll be handling that. I think this global point is something that it's been a while, to be honest, and I didn't even look at this. The second one, I have a copy of it, but the first one was the version I read. So I'm probably pretty out of date in the content. But I think the more international examples that you can have, I think also the certification process is changing, that they are now having third parties certify. And I'm not sure what implication that has for companies that are going through it, but it is a difference. And I think it could make it more challenging, perhaps, because maybe there is not that sort of fine-grained, deep knowledge if it is a third party that's doing other work. But also, you probably remember, I think towards the tail end of COVID, that it was like 9 months or 12-month waits and delays, and so things will be happening pretty quickly. That's a couple things that came to mind. I don't know if there's anything that you want to mention that might be relevant.
No, that's good. Maybe I'll maybe I have to send you an earlier draft, get your comments on it.
Sure.
Don't want to ruin your sabbatical, though.
Happy to. Oh, no. This is actually, I mean, I say it's part of my job, but it's not like I read books all the time. And if I could actually read something and then think that I had some impact on it, that would sort of make my day. So please feel free to send it over.
Chris, one question we like to end with is, what do you need right now, and how can the listeners support your work?
Well, it's great to be part of your podcast. I think that I'm someone who is doing a lot of research and writing on what I hope are the most innovative and thoughtful, socially responsible, sustainable, regenerative businesses. And so if people know of, work at such places, please be in touch. And like I mentioned, I'll be based in the Netherlands this fall. So if you happen to be in Amsterdam or the environs, please also be in touch.
Wow. I love it. Well, Chris, it's been a pleasure. I'm glad to have you back on the show. We always get into the nerdy deep dives, and I look forward to hearing how it's been going in Amsterdam once you're there. So look forward to staying in touch.
Super. Yeah. Thanks so much, Ryan. Great to talk.
Hey, Beyond the Bee listeners. If you're looking for even more inspiring conversations with leaders on the front lines of our movement towards just futures, be sure to subscribe to Next Economy Now, produced by the team at Lyft Economy. Next Economy Now broadens the focus beyond the B Corp movement to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, democratic, equitable, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy. Check out our latest episodes at lifteconomy.com/podcast. You can subscribe to Next Economy Now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts.